Welcome to the Fuzzy Mike, the interview series, the podcast, whatever Kevin wants to call it. It's Fuzzy Mike.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Fuzzy Mike. I'm your host, Kevin Klein. This episode, it's all about rewriting your story, turning adversity into achievement, and unlocking your full potential. Bobby Sexton is a physical therapist and a certified mental performance coach who's worked with business leaders, athletes, including 7 eventual Hall of Famers during his 5 years with the NFL, and people from all walks of life, really. I wanted to talk with Coach Bobby about mindset and mental performance. But to get there, we first need to learn Bobby's story and where he came from. I personally don't know the story, but I do know that Bobby says that he's lucky to even be alive.
I think so.
Why?
I think things could have gone very bad if I had stayed in the situation that I was in. Just looking at what my siblings had gone through, and there were multiple suicide attempts in my family, and gun issues, things. My brother was in a fight once and got hit in the head with a machete.
Oh my God.
Just crazy stuff that had I gone down that path, I could see myself, ending up.
Was this a product of the home life, or was this a product of the environment where you lived?
Product of the home life, because we never lived in a bad area.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't a situation like that. My father had a good job. So there was never an issue. It wasn't like we were, in the middle of, an inner city that was, had bad things going on. It was just the way we were raised. It was chaos.
You and I kind of have a similar background then, because my dad did commit suicide, and he had a great job and he was a great provider. We never wanted for anything, but his depression was something that we dealt with on a daily basis. And I inherited that gene. I've been diagnosed chronic suicidality, which means that I'm always thinking about it, but don't act on it. But I decided that I was going to escape that. I decided that I wasn't going to continue that cycle. And you did the same thing. Exactly.
And first of all, I'm sorry to hear that about your father.
That's okay.
It really is a decision that you have to make. If you really want to change your circumstances, change your life, it's a decision that you have to make.
So how many siblings do you have?
I have 4 sisters and a brother.
Okay. And what's the age range?
I am the youngest.
Really?
The next one closest to me is 10 years older than me. And
oh, wow. Okay.
actually, my oldest sister, she was in her late 70s. She passed away about a year ago.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. How close were you with them?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Is that because you were born 10 years later than the oldest one before you?
It was, but it was also, I saw the things that they were doing and they made me uncomfortable.
Oh.
And I didn't want any part of it. And I distanced myself as much as I could, even as a child.
Was that a difficult decision to make?
Growing up, it really wasn't a decision that I made. It was just kind of a natural feeling that I had. And I just kind of distanced myself. I wouldn't go, most of them had moved out, before I was old enough to know better. But I kind of naturally just distanced myself. I wouldn't go to their homes, and, I wouldn't go places with them. I did have one sister that, she treated me really well. And, I still keep in touch with her today. But the rest of my family, I probably haven't talked to any of them in, honestly, 25 years.
Yeah. I tell my mom that all the time. I'm like, we get to choose our friends. We don't get to choose our family, and I spoke with one of my previous guests. Her name is Akamia Deadweiler, and she grew up in a very toxic home environment too. And now she has kind of done the same thing as you, where she escaped that. And now she's trying to help people with their own mindset and their own getting out of those kinds of situations. Is it difficult to help people?
Uh, it's difficult to help people who haven't made the decision to be helped.
Yeah.
And when I say that, it's one thing to say, "Oh yeah, well, I want to change things," but you really need to really sit down and have a heart to heart with yourself and make the decision because what I see a lot is people will say, "Well, I want to change," but then they go right back into the situation. Maybe it's a toxic mother, for example. Um, you know, you finish talking to them and they get in their car and they go over to visit mom.
Yeah.
And mom is the crux of the issue, and they're putting themselves right back in that situation. And I don't think they really realize how damaging that is. Basically every step forward, they're taking two steps back. And
As a coach, how frustrating is that for you?
it's very frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is, and I know that you're not about this, but the good news is that's a client for life because they're not going to be helped in just one single setting. But the bad news is that they're just constantly in that cycle.
Yeah, I would much rather see their
Yeah,
their life change than keep their, it's not about the money for me.
of course.
Um, I would much rather them change their lives because the way I view it, with generational dysfunction, it's an ongoing thing. And if they don't change their lives, they're going to pass it on to their children.
Mhm.
And I don't want to see any child go through what I went through or, bad things at all. So I would much rather see them change and fix that for themselves and for their children and their children and their children. Um, until you end that cycle, it's going to continue to perpetuate.
You talk about passing that down on to children, and you are a successful physical therapist, a mindset coach. You have many, many patents. How did your environment affect your learning growing up? Because you become highly successful and you can't be dumb.
No, I was always inquisitive and my father, he was the kind of guy that it didn't matter what it was, he could fix it. And I adored my father. I really did.
Mhm.
I talk about a situation where one of the first memories that I have as a child was my mother waking me up in the middle of the night, telling me we had to get out of the house because my father was on his way home to kill us. And I was probably 3 or 4 at the time. And you can imagine as a 3 or 4 year old what that would do to your brain. But in that case, my father had never done a single thing to give any indication that he was capable of anything like that. And you know, when she said that, I'm sure in my mind, as a 3, 4 year old, 5 year old child, it just it made no sense whatsoever. He, I adored him. He was just a great guy. He was very loving. He's probably one of the biggest reasons that I was able to change because I saw the love that he had for me and for my mother. Um, and I came to the realization, talking about a toxic mother, that she used him against me over and over and over, um, and tried to turn me against him. And
Ah,
that was an ongoing thing. And that's what that night was all about. She was trying very hard. Ultimately, I didn't find this out until recently. It was probably 5 years ago now. Um, the argument that they had, and this was from one of my older siblings, it was because I was not his child. Um,
really?
yeah, she had an affair with her boss, and I was the result of the affair, and that's why I was born 10 years later than my siblings. They hadn't intended to have any more children.
And I
And
was
then
going
all
to
of a
say, you were a
sudden,
surprise.
yeah. And ultimately, my father, he he had said things to me growing up that made me think that he thought that I wasn't his child, but he didn't know for sure. He knew that she had had an affair, but and that's what the argument was all about at that time. But I don't think he ever had confirmation. I got confirmation because I had a DNA test,
Oh, wow.
and that confirmed that I wasn't his son. So, but even even though I think he, in his, deep inside, he knew, he never treated me like anything but his son. I mean, he loved me. And that's, I always say that's why I was able to overcome. And I saw that love, and, I wanted my family to have that love. I didn't want them to have, you know, the other side.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because the other side, you not only learn the love from your dad, but you learn what not to do from your mom. So you
Mhm.
really had, I mean, unfortunately, you did have the best of both worlds as far as teachers go.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had the
Fortunately.
same thing. I had the same thing, with my mom was constantly the nurturer. She was the go between when dad would come home from work, and, just, he never hit us, but the mental, I was told at 13 I'd never amount to anything. And
Mhm.
that, yeah, at 22, he said, my biggest regret is that I ever had you kids. So, that kind of stuff, and that'll weigh
Yeah.
on you. That'll weigh on you.
Oh, yeah.
But at 13, when I was told you're never going to amount to anything, I could have taken that as a self-fulfilling prophecy, but no. You know what I said? I said, "Fuck you! I am going to,"
Yeah.
and
Yep.
I reached the pinnacle of my career, Coach Bobby. I did 30 years in radio. The last 16 were spent in a top 5 market in Houston, Texas. And 5 days after I took that job is when my dad killed himself. You know,
Wow.
and I don't
Yeah.
think that has anything to do with it, but
Yeah.
I showed him.
Yeah.
I showed him.
Definitely. Yeah.
So your life actually did change for like ever when you had your first child, right?
It did.
What's
When
that
she was
like?
born, she had a serious respiratory issue. She had to be rushed to a children's hospital, and she spent a week in the NICU. And I can remember walking in there and seeing the tubes, and yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, be, things going off and tubes everywhere, and just looking at her and thinking, I think in my heart, it kind of felt like all of that chaos that was going on around her body
Yeah.
was that chaos that, of my life. And, I knew at that point I had to change. I had to get away. At that point, I still lived in Buffalo, New York, where my siblings and mother lived. Um, and it was ongoing. It was an ongoing thing. I can remember as my daughter was growing up, asking my mother to babysit, and she refused to babysit my child, but she babysat my sister's children.
Hmm.
And it was, and I didn't know at that time that I wasn't, that I was a bastard child, basically. Um, but that was the result. She resented me.
Wow.
And I can remember in my life there was one time I can remember my mother putting her arm around me, and you know that as a child, not having that affection, I think the only time I remember her expressing love to me was when my father passed away. And, even telling me I love you,
Yeah.
it just never happened.
The love that your dad had for you then, was that an over kind of maybe overcompensation for the love that your mother was not projecting? Did he realize that?
Uh, I don't think so.
Okay.
It was just a genuine love. I don't think he was trying to make up for anything she wasn't giving me. I think it was just a genuine love. They divorced when I was 5 years old.
Oh, okay.
So they were, they were separated most of my life. Um, and I don't think he was trying to overcompensate or anything like that. I think it was just a genuine love that he had. And
Wow.
it wasn't just me, it was all of my
Mhm.
siblings.
Yeah.
I could tell he showed love to all of them.
Sounds like a heck of a guy.
He was an amazing guy. He grew up in the hills of West Virginia, had a loving mother and father, um, 9 kids in his family, most of
Wow.
them boys. Um, and, eighth grade education, but he went on to work at International Paper. There was a factory in the small town that we lived in outside of Buffalo, and started cleaning floors and worked his way up and ran that plant. And it got to the point where, International Paper is a massive corporation. They've got factories all over the world. They would fly a private jet to pick him up and take him wherever they had an issue, and he would resolve the issue and come home. And he was just, he was a resourceful guy. He would figure it out. He knew,
Yeah, like
how
you
to
said, he was the
learn.
guy that could fix anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't anything. I've seen him, when he was alive. I saw him take apart things that most people wouldn't even consider. And 20 minutes later, it's working here.
Nice. Well,
Yeah,
just given your genes, you were destined to be a mindset coach, I believe, because you have your soul has got to be the hardiest in the world. A father from West Virginia, they're hard workers, and then a mother from Buffalo, the winters that you had to endure up there. I mean, dude, you were born to overcome.
oh yeah, yeah. It was the winters definitely made it easier to leave there. That's for sure.
Yeah, because you're based out of Austin, Texas now, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, what a great city that is.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah,
A lot
it's
of
changed a lot over the years. We've been here 26 years now,
oh wow.
but
Yeah,
it's
you have seen
25
some
years.
change. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's changed a lot.
Yeah, that the university's grown to about 50,000 a year. It got Dell
Mm,
computers there, the great
yeah.
medical facilities that you have around there, the Capitol. I mean, yeah, you've seen some growth.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, how is your daughter today?
Oh, she's fine. She's
Oh,
fine.
good.
She recovered fine. By the time she left, she, like I said, she spent a week in the NICU, and um, by the time she left, she was great. The nurses are just an incredible. They're incredible people to begin with, um, but they really helped us through that, and she's fine.
I, I
I,
do a lot of work with pediatric cancer patients, and you see a child in the hospital, you see him in the in the ICU, and the parents are just so helpless. And there's not, as a father who liked to fix things, perhaps you inherited a little bit of that gene, and you can't do anything.
yeah.
How rough is that for you?
It definitely drove me crazy at the time.
Yeah.
Not being able to do anything to help her. It was tough. It was really tough.
So, how did you become a mindset coach?
Um, my son, uh, my son is an athlete. I talk about my kids. Really, when I talk about my kids, I want people to understand that had I not made the decision to change, my kids wouldn't have had the opportunities that they had. My daughter went to the University of Texas. She ended up going into the Navy, spent 6 years in the Navy, you know, climbed the ladder very quickly. She just got out of the Navy about a year ago, just had our first granddaughter, um, married a guy that she met in the Navy and is doing great. My son graduated from high school, won a state championship in Texas 5A football, which is not an easy thing to do.
No.
Ended up with a full scholarship because of that, and got his master's degree in 5 years, and went on to play a year of professional football overseas. And he's, kind of at a position now. He got a great job, but he hasn't decided whether or not he's going to go back yet to Europe for next season. But, when I talk about my kids, they would have never had those opportunities. I don't believe they would have had those opportunities had I not made the decision to change. And that's one of the things I want people to understand is, you're not just doing it for yourself. It's more than you. And, a lot of that, it's probably one of the reasons that I do what I do now, because I don't want other kids to not have those kinds of opportunities.
I would think that if you're just doing it for yourself, the chances of you succeeding in making that transformation is probably low.
Mhm.
Because if you're not doing it for some bigger reason than yourself, you'll have opportunities to quit, and you'll think,
Yeah.
oh, okay, well, you know what, I'm done,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and you start, one of the big issues with dysfunction is self-sabotage. You start doing things and you think you're going along great, and then all of a sudden, it's you're going backwards, and you can't figure out why, and you did it to yourself. And there's a lot of people that do that. I work with a lot of athletes, and I also work with business owners, and they they get to a point and all of a sudden they start to fall off and they can't figure out why. And it's because they sabotage themselves.
How
And
so?
it's just, I'm sorry.
How so? I mean, I read one of your quotes is you got to learn how to get out of your own way.
Exactly.
What does that mean?
It has a lot to do with self-sabotage. If you don't get out of your own way and you sabotage yourself continuously, I'll give you an example. I worked with a client. She was a doctor. She was a veterinarian. She was a surgeon. She worked emergency veterinarian. Um, she made a decision to open a boarding facility, and she started the facility. Um, in 5 years of owning the facility, she'd never made a penny. She was losing $60,000 to $70,000 a month.
Month?
A month. Yeah, it was a big facility, and I mean, it was just pouring money out. And she had borrowed a ton of money from friends and family and the bank, and she was crazy in debt. As I started to look at things, having run businesses for myself and being successful in business, I know what it looks like. And when I started looking at it, every time things would start to get on a upward trajectory for her, she would do something that brought it back down. And as I got to know her, it turned out as a child, her sibling, her only sibling, her brother, had been killed in a car accident. And ultimately, she didn't feel like she deserved to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's where the sabotage came from.
Yeah.
Every time she would, start to get some success, the guilt would take over and it would back down. And, once we got past that and realized you're doing this yourself, the success rate, I mean, it just skyrocketed for but it's just something that people do at the end that in most cases, I think they have, deep inside, they know they're doing it, but they just cannot help themselves.
Do you think that what's stronger, the fear of success or the fear of failure? Because when you say that she felt she didn't deserve it, that's a fear of success.
It is. Yeah. In her case, it was the guilt she felt.
Sure.
That was her reason for not wanting to succeed. But it is, I don't know that one is stronger than the other. I think probably because if you haven't experienced true success, you don't know what it feels like. So, that failure is probably a little more comfortable because
Okay.
it's something you've always had. One of the things I talk about, the human brain is just, it's an incredible structure. It's amazing. But one of the primary functions of the human brain is to protect us. And in protecting us, what it looks like for the brain is just status quo. If we left it up to the brain, we'd never get out of bed. We'd just stay, covered up comfortably and never try anything, never do anything, because that's change, and the brain doesn't like change. So, that overcoming that is it's a hard thing to do. You basically have to rewire your brain. Uh,
And I've just completed a physical therapy session. I went to 10 sessions with a performance coach because I'm an ultra endurance runner. And I was always getting injured on my right leg, whether it was tendon strains or, shin splints or whatever. And we realized that my mind had decided that based on my gait, that it needed to change the way that my foot hit the ground to accommodate the other deficiencies that I had. And
yep,
so in 10 weeks, we had to rewire my brain and kind of connect my legs to my brain. What you said earlier about the brain being amazing, it is absolutely trippy what our brain does.
it's incredible, and it does it without us even knowing it.
I know, right?
Yeah, yeah, and the decisions that the brain can make before you even think about it are just incredible.
Yeah.
It's one of It's one of the things, if you ever watch Top Gun and they say, you can't think when you're flying. That's true. Because by the time you think, your brain is 10 steps ahead of you already to begin with. If you just let the brain do its thing, in most cases, you're going to be happy with what it does. If you start thinking and start interfering with it, that's when things start to go wrong. But getting back to why I brought the brain up, the brain wanting to be comfortable at all times, it also resists positive change.
Oh,
Because even positive change is change to the
yes.
brain. So, if you've been doing something and it's uncomfortable, but your brain has gotten comfortable with it, your brain doesn't want to change that. So it says, no, back off. And, what I try to help people understand is if you're focused, you can actually use that to your advantage. In tricking the brain to helping it understand that, what you're trying to accomplish is not the negative. It's the positive. It's the comfortable. And once you get to a point when you work that enough, you can be successful with it. And then the brain starts to help you change yourself. And you go from that negative, one of the big things is negative self-talk.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people, we constantly have a conversation going on in our mind. And in a lot of cases, it's a negative conversation.
That's
It's
all I
always,
have, Bobby.
yeah, it's always negative.
Yeah.
So, changing that is probably the biggest first step in changing your entire life, quite honestly.
Is it a matter of semantics to do that? Because, like, well, for example, if I wake up and I say, "Oh, I gotta run," then I'm not real enthused about it. But if I wake up and I say, "Oh, I get to run," that's
Exactly.
okay. So it is just as simple as that, then.
It is. If you're consistent with that,
Uh-huh.
it becomes automatic.
Wow.
Running doesn't become a chore anymore. Running becomes a treat. And your brain sees it that way. And once you get the brain seeing it that way, your brain says, no, you got to run. You have to run. If you don't run, I'm not comfortable. And that's the goal ultimately.
How much stock and how much truth do you put in this statement? If you think you can't, you're right.
Uh, it, 1,000,000%,
Really?
1,000,000%.
Okay. So then, if you think you can, you will.
If you think you can enough times, you
Really?
will.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't, today say, well, I'm going to go run and then take 3 days off and then say, I'm going to go run and think that you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
It's not going to change your thinking. You've got to be consistent with it.
So
It has to be a repetitive thing.
are there consistent mantras that a mindset coach like yourself gives their clients, and they write them down or they commit them to memory?
Um, I try, I don't want people to rely on a crutch.
Uh-huh.
So I don't want to give them something that in their mind, this is what's changing them. I want them to use their own brain and really think through that change, because that's when it's really going to become ingrained in the brain. I don't want them to have, if I don't say this, I'm not going to get better. There things like that. It goes along with forgiveness. I'm not a big forgiveness fan. I don't. It bothers me that therapists and they tell people that the first step is forgiveness. Well, there are a lot of people that just can't do that. I'm one of those people. I have a very hard time forgiving.
Uh-huh.
When you wrong me, you wrong me. And I don't want people to look at that and say, well, I can't ever get over this because I can't forgive. That to me it becomes an excuse. It becomes a crutch, and it allows them to stay in that miserable state because in their mind, they can't forgive.
Yeah.
To me, And actually, I listened to that podcast that you just mentioned,
Oh,
and
okay.
a lot of that, it really resonated with me. And you actually made something, you actually made a comment. You said, I don't forgive, I don't forget, I just move on.
Uh-huh.
And to me, that's perfect.
Oh,
Absolutely
cool.
perfect. Because as you move on, the more distance you put between yourself and whatever you're trying to distance yourself from, the more, time heals all wounds.
Yes.
I really believe that's true. Yes, down the road, you know, you think about bad situations and things that have happened in your life, and at the time that they happen, it's, it can be the most heart wrenching thing ever.
Hmm.
But as you move further away from it, it, it that lessens and lessens. And the same is true with, you know, the dysfunction situation or forgiveness. The further you get away from the situation, the easier it is for you to not think about that situation. So forgiveness becomes irrelevant at that point.
Yeah.
You didn't need to forgive because you've basically forgotten for the
Yeah.
most part. And even
It-
when you do think about it, it's not that intense feeling anymore. So I'm,
Yeah, it's like if you were to pass a car on the highway and you look in your rearview mirror and you're going faster than them, eventually they're going to fade.
correct.
Like
Yeah.
this bad memory or whatever. It'll
Yeah.
eventually just fade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really true of any negative memory, negative thoughts, anything. And actually, quite honestly, people themselves, one of the things that I talk to people about, we mentioned this, if you don't get away from the whatever is, let me give you an example. If you got a rock in your shoe and you just keep walking, it's not going to get any better. If I take that rock out and I throw it, I walk away, well, now I'm putting distance between myself and the rock and it doesn't hurt me anymore. Until you do that, you can't keep walking on the rock and expect to feel better.
Very true. What a
So
beautiful analogy too. I
yeah,
love that.
it's true of people as well. In my case, I knew I had to get away from my mother. I had to get away from my siblings. Uh, my siblings, they in their minds, my mother could do no wrong.
Mhm.
They were convinced that my father was the issue. I was far enough removed, I think, because of being born 10 years later. I was far enough removed that eventually I could see that it was the opposite. And I did, when I found out that I took the DNA test and found out that my father wasn't my biological father, I had a long conversation with one of my sisters, and she does talk to the other siblings. And, she was one that truly believed that my mother could do no wrong. And in having those conversations and, telling her, look, I've got confirmation of this. I'm not, I'm not, we don't have the same father. You know, it started to, I think, click in her mind that, hey, maybe it was the other way around. Maybe I
Uh-huh.
didn't look at this from a realistic view hard enough to understand that it wasn't him. It was it was really her.
Yeah.
It was, putting him down and saying bad things about him. And there were all kinds of things that, she told me that my mother had said about him that were just simply not true. They were just totally made up, fabricated to get them to hate him, essentially.
Wow. Man,
So
she had to be a miserable person living with that, I guess, with that mentality and us versus them.
she was, and looking back, um, her parents, I can remember being, I don't know, probably 6, 7 years old, and going to her parents' home in Florida. And just my grandmother and grandfather were they were just miserable people. And I could, looking back now, that's where, I mean, it was her dysfunction. That's where she got it from.
Yeah.
And feeling that as a 6, 7-year-old kid, I didn't want to go there. I didn't want anything to do with it. And that's where, the realization, okay, it just carried on from them to her. And I feel sorry for her.
Of course. Yeah.
For having that in her life as a child, but she never made the decision to change and carried that on into my life.
Yeah. I don't think the resources were there at that time when she was growing up or when she was raising you. We've got tremendous resources now,
Yeah.
you included.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Back then, rub some dirt on it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And nobody really understood. I mean, people I don't think really understand now what mental illness is and what having a wrong mindset does to people. But now we have studies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually you bring that up. I wish this study was more talked about. There was a study back in the 90s called the ACE study, ACE, adverse childhood event. And researchers, it was two researchers, they talked to over 17,000 people. And they wanted to know, out of a list of 10 adverse events, abuse, physical abuse, divorce, uh, mental abuse, sexual abuse, there was a list of 10 different things. How many of them had experienced one or more things from that list? 80% experienced at least one adverse childhood event. And most of them, I think it was 75%, experienced more than one.
Wow.
I mean, that you think about that, and you're if you're sitting in a room with 100 people, 75 of those people went through some hell.
Have had multiple traumas in their life.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
It's something that I would like people to understand. You're not alone.
Oh God, no. That's one of the reasons why I do the fuzzy mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're very far from alone. And one of the issues is, actually, Dr. Phil said this. I heard him on Joe Rogan's podcast. And he said, when we look at people, we see what they want us to see. Even though they're privately, their life may be hell, we're seeing this image of them that they want to project to us. And ultimately, in probably 75, 80% of the cases, it's smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
But we're comparing ourselves to that and saying, well, my life is terrible. That person has such a great life. No, probably not. We're just seeing what they're projecting.
Yep. Kind of, one of my psychiatrists when I was living in Houston, she said 20% of the population are on some sort of mental health medication, 80% need to be.
Yeah.
That's what she said. So
yeah.
let's you've worked with professional athletes. Your son is a professional athlete. What is the difference between our mindset as what I'm going to say athletic mortals and professional athletes, athletic immortals?
The biggest difference is when they make a decision to do something, it's done. There's no variation. There's no going back. If I'm going to work out 6 days a week at 4:00 in the morning, they're going to work out 6 days a week at 4:00 in the morning. They're not going to wake up and, I'm too tired today, roll back over. It's done. Their mind is so focused that there's no variation once they make their mind up to do something.
That's an adaptable thing that we can do it ourselves.
Sure. It's called discipline.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then why do, and I know a lot of professional golfers have a psychologist, a sports psychologist. When you get to that level, why do you need somebody like that?
Um, because there's always things that are going to happen. There's always things going on around you. There's always, it, it- and this is true not only of athletes, this is true of anyone. There's no such thing as a perfect life. There's no such thing as, the ultimate comfortable. You could win the Powerball lottery tomorrow and you're still going to have problems. You're still going to have issues in your life. Things are still going to come up that you have to deal with. So, even professional athletes, in a lot of cases, these guys, I've seen guys that got, you know, I'll give you an example. We had a guy, my first year in the league. Um,
National
we had
Football
a
League.
guy, I'm sorry.
The National Football League?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a guy come in. He was a linebacker. He was 5'8", maybe 5'9". Was never supposed to be there. Undersized, underweight. Uh, he had been told his entire life, there's no way. You're just not big enough. You're not fast enough. You're not strong enough. And he overcame all of it. When he got there, success actually crushed him. And within a year, he was out of the league. And I actually looked him up a couple of years ago, and he had been shot
Oh,
and
wow.
killed in a drive-by. And he was a guy that he came from a place very different um, than most. And when the success came, for example, the first road trip we took, we had a chartered plane. All the players are on the plane. In the back of the plane, there was always card games going on, and they were betting. And those guys aren't. It's not penny ante. It's $100 pots and $100 antes and more. And he got drawn into that. And by the time we landed, I think we were going to Kansas City. By the time we landed in Kansas City, he was $25,000 in debt.
Oh, my God.
Now he had gotten a $50,000 signing bonus. And thankfully, the players made him think that he had to pay that until we got back to Buffalo. And they told him when we got off the plane, don't worry about it. They were never going to make him pay that money. But, it success overwhelmed him, and he couldn't deal with it. And it really, in his case, was a huge negative.
Yeah. It sounds like that he proved naysayers wrong. It almost sounds like once he reached that level of success, what was there left to fight for? So
Probably had a lot to do with it.
so then how do we move that goal? How do we move when we've reached, like, I reached the pinnacle of my career because I didn't want to work in LA nor New York or Chicago. How do we move that goal to keep us motivated?
That's something that professional athletes do very well.
Uh-huh.
If they set a goal to win, a MVP of the league, or to make the Pro Bowl or whatever it is, and then they do that, in most cases, there are those guys that once they get there, they're done. They their career falls off from there. But for the most part, because they have that mentality, when they make a decision, it's going to be done. It's onto something else, or it's I want to be in the Pro Bowl every year, and they're gonna do everything they possibly can to get there. It's that once they make that decision, it's for the most part done. I work with a lot of kids. I've coached quarterbacks for about 25 years, and young youth quarterbacks, high school quarterbacks, and I tell them all the time the difference between a guy that has all of the athletic ability, can throw the ball a mile, run like the wind, agile, but he's flipping burgers at Burger King. The difference between him and the guy that's the starting quarterback in the NFL, it's between his ears.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes down to what's between his ears. And can he dedicate himself? Can he discipline himself? And in most cases, they have the talent, they have the athletic ability, but they don't have the ability to, like the guys that make it, focus and make that decision and make it happen.
Could you get through to a kid like that and change them?
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's tough because they don't want it or because they don't realize it.
Uh, they all say they want it.
Of course they do.
They all say they want it. They want the big paycheck. But when it comes time to actually do it, there's a lot of guys that they talk a good game, but you can't force them to do it. And when there's nobody standing there harping on them, at 4 o'clock in the morning, come on, I'm going to drag you out of bed. If there's nobody there to do that, a lot of times it becomes real easy to just roll over. And there's other factors that go into that as well. In a lot of cases, they were out until 2 o'clock the night before because they don't have the discipline. They let their buddies drag them into doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And all of it plays a role in getting to where you want to go.
How long does it take to change our mindset? I had a baseball coach tell me it takes 18 days to commit something to muscle memory.
You'll hear all kinds of, as a physical therapist, you hear all kinds of different things when it comes to that, committing to muscle memory, 10,000 reps and, all kinds of different things. But it really comes down to how bad you really want to change.
Yeah.
And, you hear, well, you got to hit rock bottom. If it's a alcoholic or drug addict, that's always the thing. Yeah. Until he hits rock bottom, he's not going to change. Well, I don't know if it's truly hitting rock bottom or if it's mentally getting to the point where you've just had enough and you are ready to make a change. It's it doesn't matter what it is, losing weight, anything like that, until you've truly make the decision. And you ask how fast. Well, if you're truly ready to make the change, if that's something that is realistic and it's, you just made up your mind, that's it. Once you've made that decision and it's an honest, really thought out decision, and this isn't a thing where somebody needs to talk to a therapist or, that's another thing that bothers me is, people get it in their head that they have to have a $200 an hour therapist to get any better, to improve their life. They don't. And a lot of people, because they can't afford that, it never happens because in their mind, unless they have that, they can't improve. They can't get better.
So what do we need then?
We need to make a decision.
It's really self-motivating.
It has to be. It has to be because no matter what I tell you, if you haven't made that decision, and I've had this situation with athletes in the past where, oh yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that. 2 days later, it's, why didn't you do that? What happened? Well, my buddy came over and, we just decided to go, have a beer, and one beer led to another. And, before I knew it was 3 o'clock in the morning. Really? Okay. I mean, that tells you everything right there.
Yeah.
That person hasn't truly made the decision to change.
Once you get somebody on the right path, once you get somebody thinking the way that they want to think, do they typically stay in that frame, or do they see this success and they're like, oh, okay, cool, I got it now, and then they regress?
So in most cases, there's something that has caused that in them. And it's like I said, if they go see mom and mom is the, she's the trigger, they're going to fall back. If they keep focused, stay away from, it's an alcoholic walking into a bar after, when they're trying to change their life, it's not going to be a good thing. They're putting themselves back in the situation that caused it in the first place. If they can stay out of that situation and not deal with those things that caused it in the first place, in most cases, they can maintain it. But when they start trying, I can handle it. I can take that drink. I can have one. That's a slippery slope. And if you can't get them back on track immediately, it's probably going in the wrong direction.
Wow.
And you're starting over.
Yeah, it's a thin line.
It's a very thin line. Yeah.
Very
It doesn't
thin
take
line.
a lot.
So how do we acquire your services, sir?
Probably my website is the easiest. My first consultation with people, I'll spend an hour talking to people. I'm not going to charge anything. I want to know that somebody is committed to change, because if they're not, they're wasting their money and they're wasting my time.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not just looking to, pile up clients and take money. I want people to be successful with their goals, what they want to change. And again, for me, a lot of it comes down to, it's not just their life that they're changing.
Right.
It's their kids' lives that they're changing. And that to me is more important than anything.
Or if they're a boss, it's not only their life that they're changing, but maybe their managerial style, which would have an effect on all their employees.
It impacts their entire life.
Yeah.
Relationships, children, work, whatever it is. And a lot of times they when they do start to change, they start to see all of those things improve. And career goes up, relationships, their kids start doing better. Their kids start striving for more. It's easier to get them out of bed in the morning. All of a sudden, they're more excited about going to school because they're seeing mom or dad or who, they're seeing that person's life pick up.
Sure.
And that's infectious.
Yeah. How rewarding is it for you to see somebody make the change and commit to it?
I mean, that's especially when I know that there's impact beyond them. I mean, it means everything. I mean, that's what it's all about.
It's what motivates you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
Well, hey, brother, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Tell your daughter thank you for her service, and tell your son congratulations on that career, man. That's amazing.
Thank you.
You bred some overachievers like yourself there, coach.
I'm just glad they didn't have to deal with what I dealt with.
You know what? But you dealt with it and you realized that it didn't need to progress beyond you. And you decided, as you mentioned, you made the decision to make that change, and you've done it. So congratulations.
Thank you.
What is the website for those of us that are listening audio and not watching the YouTube? I'll put it up on the YouTube screen, but what is it audio?
It's M as in mental, P as in performance, mpcoachbobby.com.
Got it, brother. Hey, thank you so much. Continued success to you. Keep changing lives and keep bettering society, sir.
All right. I appreciate it.
Man, I really enjoyed that conversation. It was totally energizing and empowering for me, anyway, to learn that we can be better. We can achieve what we want as long as we commit to it. So whatever it is that you're dreaming of, aspiring to, or wanting to change in yourself, commit to it and be disciplined about it. Plus, remember, not only will you reap the rewards of your dedication, so will everyone around you. My thanks to Bobby Sexton for joining me, and my thanks to you for listening. If you don't mind, please give this a rating, a like, and subscribe to the channel for future episodes. I sure do appreciate that more than you'll ever know. The Fuzzy Mike is hosted and produced by Kevin Klein. Production elements by Zach Sheesh at the Radio Farm. Social media director is Trish Klein. I'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode. And don't forget, check out the Tuttle and Klein podcast with new episodes every Wednesday. Thank you again.
That's it for the Fuzzy Mike. Thank you. The Fuzzy Mike with Kevin Klein.
Fuzzy Mike.